The buzz of Super Bowl season is intoxicating for the ad industry. For weeks leading up to the big game, we talk about the ads, how much they cost, which celebrities will be featured, which brands are returning and which are debuting. There's even a major news outlet with a numerical ranking of every single spot. So we know which one was the nation's favorite and which was dead last and forgotten. But with all of the hype around Super Bowl ads, it's really easy to forget about the humans who made them. So today we're shifting our focus away from the ads themselves to the human beings who created them. The people who face the pressure, the deadlines, the client demands, and the terrifying prospect of their work being judged by over 100 million people, including very opinionated LinkedIn thought leaders, and of course, me. The industry is too busy debating the merits of celebrity cameos and dissecting every punchline, when we should be shining the spotlight on the people who have poured their heart and soul into these stories that continuously have millions of people crowded around their TVs. I've never had the chance to work on a Super Bowl ad myself, so I tracked down some people who have, and I asked a whole bunch of nosy questions to learn what really goes into making a Super Bowl spot. Here's what they had to say.
So it's like terrifying and this huge opportunity while also being like, whatever, like we probably won't happen.
Is it going to happen?
Like
the likelihood. Yeah. It's like the likelihood of you getting a spot and sometimes feels it's like, what are the chances? You know, it feels like it's so rare. It's like a lucky few almost in a way.
This is Frank Viglione and Gabby Bates, a senior creative team at High Dive, who landed their big Super Bowl break with a Jeep commercial in 2023. Their words perfectly captured the emotional tightrope that creatives walk when tasked with creating for the biggest stage in advertising. Being put on a Super Bowl brief comes with this cocktail of excitement, ambition, and what I would argue is a healthy amount of skepticism. Because what are the chances that one idea from you and your partner makes it all the way? One of the big things I wanted to know about the making of a Super Bowl spot was how the brief works, how it gets assigned, just how many ideas you cycle through. And while we're getting started, let me just insert a blanket disclaimer here. I, of course, didn't talk to every single person who has ever made a Super Bowl spot. Every agency has their own process. So while I'm sharing the things I learned from my community and the people I interviewed, there will certainly be exceptions and nuance to everything. But it seems like most agencies, in most scenarios, hand the brief to anyone and everyone. Whoever wants a crack at it can have it. But that means there's competition, not just from teams who are normally on different accounts, but also teams of all levels.
I think at the time we were a mid-level team, but you're working with GCDs and CDs. There are people that have, decades of experience on you. So it feels intimidating.
To start, the brief is typically pretty open-ended. Maybe there's a specific product to feature or a general objective. And as time goes on, the clients start to understand what they're liking, and the brief becomes more focused with more specific parameters. And then the agency is essentially rebriefed. And they could be rebriefed multiple times. Ideas can fall off throughout these rounds. Sometimes ideas come back after being killed a couple of rounds ago. New ones, of course, pop up throughout the entire process. So you start with a lot of creative freedom and zero in as you go. It's a lot of exploration and iteration, which of course leads to a lot of hours.
So it's definitely an investment in terms of hours and agency resource and all this stuff, but we feel like the value that comes out of it is definitely worth it. My name is Thiago Cruz, and I'm the Chief Creative Officer at Great here in New York.
As soon as I found out I'd get to chat with the CCO, I knew I wanted to ask about the investment. Because let's be honest, time is money in the agency world. And when you've got every creative team burning the midnight oil to crack this brief, those timesheets probably look pretty scary to the finance department.
I think the opportunity for most creatives that are interested in that type of project is priceless, right? So for the agency, we feel like it makes sense to invest the time and the energy in this because, yes, not just because it's such a huge stage, but because we feel like it will actually help move the needle for the clients and will have an impact in their business. So we feel like it's a worthy investment on our side as good partners. But at the same time, taking into consideration that this can be an opportunity for a lot of people that work on other brands that potentially will never be on that kind of stage. We want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to, put their best work forward and hope for the best.
So based on what I learned, a Super Bowl brief really is all hands on deck, or whichever hands want to be on deck. And the energy in the agency isn't necessarily competitive and tense. It's more collaborative and hopeful.
Which I think for us has been a very freeing mindset, the motivation of it, the potential motivation of it, but also just being aware of the likelihood of this hitting is so rare. So why not just come to the table with exactly what we want to make?
Another part of the process I really wanted to know more about was the timeline, which honestly seems to be a little all over the place. For accounts who know they're going to be in the Super Bowl every year, they essentially get started the Monday after the big game. Others start the summer before, and some only have a few weeks when a brand decides to buy a very last minute spot.
We've done a Super Bowl ad where we found out 6 weeks before the spot that they might be able to get a spot and they want to create an ad that might run in the Super Bowl, all the way to we starting an ad, over a year in advance, running it through all testing and everything else.
This is Jacques Spitzer, the CEO of Raindrop, the agency behind the incredibly successful Dr. Squatch marketing, among many others. With his experience of both drawn-out, year-long campaigns and last-minute scrambles, I asked him what the ideal timeline would be for a Super Bowl spot. Because to me, a year sounds all-consuming and like a breeding ground for spinning your wheels and unnecessarily fixing things that weren't broken. But just a few weeks for the biggest stage of the year? That sounds chaotic and obviously stressful.
I'd say 6 months would be the perfect amount of time. It's a lot less pressure when there's less time. I'll tell you that, because there's just less time to worry. You just got to execute.
When you think of Super Bowl advertisers, the usual suspects probably come to mind. Budweiser, Pepsi, Doritos, huge brands with huge budgets and pretty significant brand recognition. But the Super Bowl isn't exclusive to the Goliath brands of the world. There are a growing number of small brands stepping up to the plate, hoping to make their mark.
Every brand is coming to the Super Bowl with a very different place and point of view. Some people, it's their biggest investment ever, right? Like they are scrounging together what they can to buy these spots because they're very expensive. And expensive is very subjective, meaning you have brands where they're doing billions of dollars, right? And it's a piece of their budget. And then you have brands, between 100 million to 300 million in revenue who take the plunge on buying this ad. And it is a big deal for them. And what they're buying, which I've realized through working on them, is they're buying that overnight jump that you can get in brand awareness.
So for the big brands, the Super Bowl is still a big deal, but it's just one piece of their larger marketing puzzle. For smaller brands and those who buy regional spots, this Super Bowl campaign is their big swing for the year, and it'll define everything they do after. To get the lowdown on regional spots, I talked to someone who knows that part of the game inside and out.
Chris Petrowski. I'm the president of Bedford Advertising here in Dallas, Texas. We've been making Super Bowl commercials on and off for the past 40 years, but consistently for the past 7.
For those 7 years, Chris and his team have been working on regional Super Bowl spots for Red McCombs Automotive in San Antonio. For brands like this, a Super Bowl commercial isn't just a one-hit wonder that they'll forget about in a couple months.
What if we leveraged it through the whole year and, got you essentially more bang for your buck for that production shoot? You can use it the whole year. You can use it in little splices. You can do 15, 5s, 30s, social. That's what generally happens with our Super Bowl spots. I think that puts more pressure on the client, right? Because it's not just, if it doesn't turn out great, maybe it's something that they forget about in March, but these are going to be run on broadcast, CTV, OTT, social for the entire year. So it really does have to be essentially perfect in their eyes.
Perfection adds a lot of pressure, whether you're making a national or regional spot. And while I initially thought maybe regional doesn't have the same level of pressure, Jacques made a great point.
The people in those regions have no idea that it's a regional spot. None. To them, it's just another spot, right? They don't know that it's not national. And so, for us, it doesn't really change to me the approach or the mindset.
And Chris believes there's an added benefit and unique advantage to regional spots, and that's local recognition. Viewers in that region can see familiar faces on TV, which is exactly what happens for his client because they actually feature real employees in the spot.
We do have a lot of characters from the dealership in there, and then they promote it because they get it. And so it does create almost an organic viral effect in a small market, which is kind of what we want. So usually after the halftime show, they're really hyped or they really want to say something about the halftime show. And then all of a sudden they see Red McCombs Automotive on there. And they're like, hey, that's Joe. I know Joe. So it makes it really, really fun.
I want to focus on the fun for a minute because amidst the deadlines and endless rounds of revisions, you also get to play.
We had to find a gymnast who was 230 pounds who could do a back handspring.
All of us were trying to find creative ways to write the animals in, and what dance would they do, and where would they be in the scene? How would an ostrich dance? How would, an alligator dance? Or like, I remember it'd be kind of funny, like trying to act it out with other people of like, no, it'd be more like flapping like that. Like, oh no, it's flapping more like this. Its neck would move more like this, not like this. It gets so silly. And it's just, it's one of those funny advertising things where it's like, how often are you going to talk with people in a serious conversation, but it sounds so ridiculous about how a giraffe's neck should move or how an ostrich should leap?
See, it's not all super serious business. There are so many unexpected moments of absurdity and wonder that make this industry so much fun to be a part of. And things can certainly get weird. And honestly, weird humor is my favorite type of Super Bowl commercial. But another very popular Super Bowl commercial trope is celebrity. Celebrities have become an expected staple of Super Bowl spots. It's a competition to see who can get the biggest, most relevant star in their commercial every year. But I've also wondered, how do these celebrity partnerships come to be? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? The celebrity or the idea? Are teams handed a celebrity in the brief and build ideas based on them? Or does the celebrity get chosen once a concept has been figured out? I talked to Marissa Festante, Executive Director of Partnerships at MMC, and she said typically the idea comes first and the celeb gets pitched the idea afterwards. Generally, the creatives will have a talent in mind, and some ideas live and die on if that talent says yes or no. And there's also the consideration of which celebrities will actually stand out. Marissa says that while a lot of people tend to just aim for the biggest name humanly possible, it can be so much more effective to find someone who is actually relevant right now. So that all makes sense. Often the celebrity serves the idea. And it seems like a lot of Super Bowl concepts are flexible, where a lot of different celebrities could fit into them. Like last year, Uber Eats did the commercial where people are forgetting things so that they can remember to use Uber Eats. They had Jennifer Aniston, David Schwimmer, Jelly Roll, David and Victoria Beckham. You could swap any of them with other celebrities and the concept still works. For some ideas, you might need to get more specific, like you want an athlete or someone with a nostalgic tie-in or someone with a specific accent, like the Hyundai Smart Pack commercial in 2020 that featured celebrities with a Boston accent. And then there are those concepts that are so inseparable from a certain celebrity that, like Marissa says, will live or die on if the talent says yes or no. I think of Bubbly's spot with Michael Bublé in 2019 or last year's Michael Cera V. And when it comes to celebrities, I personally prefer spots like this. Both the Michael Bublé and Michael Cera spots are two of my absolute favorites from recent years, and it's because the concept was just so perfectly written for them. You can't just pop any celeb in there. But I would assume that there are also scenarios where the celebrity is handed to the agency as part of the brief. This year's Bud Light commercial stars Post Malone, Shane Gillis, and Peyton Manning. And the brand clearly has an existing relationship with all of them. Posty and Peyton were in last year's Super Bowl spot. Posty has been doing some concert content with them recently, and Shane has been starring in their commercials for the last couple months. So in cases where there's an existing relationship like that, they could be included in the brief or at least offered up as an option. So with celebrities being such an expected piece of Super Bowl ads, where brands are competing and outspending each other on talent, other brands who don't rely on celebrities have a chance to stand out because of the lack of star power.
For me, I'm not a big celebrity person in Super Bowl ads. The reason I say that is I think that it can be distracting to what you're trying to communicate. It's like, oh, I really like the one with so and so. And then you're like, what's it for? And they're like, I don't know. Right. And so when I think about like my favorite Super Bowl ads of the last decade, almost none of them include a celebrity.
I want to shift gears here for a minute because obviously, as a creative, a lot of my immediate focus and curiosity is on the creative side. But I also wanted to explore the media side. So I talked to a number of media directors, managers, and planners, including Scott Decker, Steve St. Germain, Jennifer Glass, and a few others who wanted to remain anonymous.
I'm Scott Decker. I'm currently looking after paid media strategy and planning in North America for HP Inc.
Scott has been involved in numerous Super Bowl campaigns, particularly for Anheuser-Busch brands, and he really opened my eyes to the sheer amount of work that media teams do before, during, and after the Super Bowl. Plus, working with a behemoth like Anheuser-Busch can mean multiple Super Bowl campaigns in the same year, which, as you could imagine, amplifies everything.
Which was really enlightening and a huge source of growth for me in my career. I learned so much. But I'm also not sure that I would willingly walk back into doing multiple Super Bowl campaigns in one year again if I had the choice.
It's easy for me to imagine the pressures that creatives face in this process. Can you come up with an idea that can beat out the tons of other teams? Will your idea last 15 rounds of client reviews? Will the spot end up being totally different from what you originally pitched? What will the public think? But what about media? Because unlike a regular campaign, where the main challenge is getting your ad noticed, the Super Bowl guarantees a massive audience. So what is keeping media folks up at night?
Where the pressure comes on for media is, how can we place it within the game? What's the right strategy? Do we want to be in the first quarter? And, when you are basically guaranteed a high viewership, do you wait for the fourth quarter, where if it's a really tight game, you've got all eyes on the screen, but also it could be a blowout. Nobody could be there anymore. But then even beyond the game, there is, how do we orchestrate a thunderclap moment for the brand? And so it's much more than just what's happening on game day.
Yep, those teasers and pre-released spots, they do actually help. And as Scott says, they're a crucial part of the Super Bowl media strategy. Without them, you're leaving money on the table.
If you just run a spot within the show, you're not doing enough and you're almost wasting your money. You've seen, of course, all of the spots being released as early as like 3-4 weeks ago. And that is no accident, right? The brands are doing things to get as many eyeballs on the game as possible, or on the spot as possible. These are things like, not so much anymore, given its new ownership, but Twitter first views, YouTube mastheads when it was a full day of ownership, securing a segment on Good Morning America or other morning shows, and really orchestrating things down to the minute to make sure that you are having this loud impact, and carrying that through during the game and then after the game. And so, at least in my experience at Anheuser-Busch specifically, we are pretty much on call for the month before and the month after the Super Bowl. And we are reporting, if not daily, every other day, or sometimes by week or twice a week, how many views, how many completed views, how many comments, what's the social sentiment, how many shares, all of those things that the leadership team is looking for to verify that this was a good investment of the dollars and it's going to turn around and lead to increases in sales. Another
component that I didn't even realize is how any creative change re-triggers legal, network, and NFL clearance. So all of those last-minute scene swaps and copy changes send the media team into a flurry of tasks to get things done by the network's deadline, on top of everything else they're already doing. This is all just a reminder that Super Bowl success isn't just about the idea or the celebrity or how funny your spot is. Success comes down to every little detail, every piece of planning, and the efforts of the entire team. So after months and months, or just a few weeks, of this intense collaborative effort, the big day finally arrives. And I can only imagine the mix of emotions that people must feel as they sit down to watch the game, knowing that their work is about to be broadcast to over 100 million people.
I got with my buddy and we went to it was a local bar thing. I think I told my friend and my friend told a random guy at the bar that's like, oh yeah, my buddy's like worked on the spot. He's like, no way, you worked on the spot? And then he told other people and they were like, you worked on that spot? And so I had like a little like random like posse of people and then they watched it with me and they're like and they got me a drink. It was strangers and it was actually a really cute moment.
Something that I always tell myself is it's not real until it's truly like on the TV.
Yes.
So I don't even think I bought that it was real yet. Just like to be totally honest.
I'm with Gabby on this one. I have been burned too many times to get excited about something until it's actually happening. And that's admittedly sad. I don't recommend operating that way. But things change a lot in this industry. Clients change their minds, clients change jobs, and then new ones come in with different opinions. Media buys change, budgets get cut, whole finished campaigns can get scrapped. There are so many reasons why something you made could just not air. And when that something you made is a Super Bowl spot, it's no wonder that it's super hard to believe that it's actually going to air until you see it with your own eyes.
And so I was just with my friends and I think we like relatively knew the quarter, but we didn't know the exact placement. During the football playing portions, like everyone's jibber jabbering and then the commercials come on and we're all like, just silence. And it came on and it was like the same thing. Like it's just when you're with your friends and your family that have supported you through all the late nights and all the ups and downs and like they're just so happy for you because all you're going to see are the things that you wish you could have, at least for me, you wish you could have changed, that you know were a different way before it ended up this way, or like you just end up seeing the flaws because you've seen it so much. But when you're with everyone else and like people who are seeing it for the first time, it's just it kind of level sets you of like, okay, like that was amazing that we just did that. And I felt proud at that moment.
Do you feel like in that moment your friends and family like finally understood what you do for a living?
Yeah. Even still no.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure.
They're like, why was that so much work?
Yeah, I think I got more of that. I got like, it was good. But why'd you work that much?
Yeah.
I'm like, you don't get it. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's all right.
One thing I didn't even think of was that for people like Chris doing regional spots, they might not live in the market that their spot is running in. He doesn't get to see the spot he made. He just has to wait for the text from his client saying that they actually saw it.
Because I'm not in the market, I'm like, well, what if we just didn't do something and it just doesn't show? Like that is a lot of pressure, right? Obviously, we've never had that happen, knock on wood, but so I'm just waiting after I get our local one here in DFW, and I wait and see if I get a text from Peter, and it always is like something super appreciative. So that's fun, but I'm always very, very nervous waiting for that spot.
Once the spot has aired and the dust has settled, these teams can't really breathe a sigh of relief quite yet, right? Because now they have to face the court of public opinion. The critics, the armchair quarterbacks, thought leaders taking to LinkedIn to post 5 reasons this Super Bowl spot failed. There's the USA Today ad meter and similar rankings from a ton of other publications. And then there's that crazy lady on Stuff About Advertising who's constantly picking everything apart. As someone with an arguably unhealthy reliance on validation, this would be the hardest part of the process for me. But the folks who I talked to seemed much more zen about it. Jacques was thrilled to just be a part of the Dr. Squatch spot and was really proud to see it do well in the rankings considering their small budget, saying that they were punching well above their weight. Frank and Gabby agreed early on as a team that any outside opinions would be bonus, whether positive or negative. That if they are proud of their work, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just so you know, if you ever criticize one of our ads and hate it, we'll just DM you and say like, damn, you got us. Darn.
You're right.
Greg Hahn, the co-founder and CCO of Mischief, posted some sage advice on LinkedIn around this topic, and it was inspired by the wisdom of Prince, who said, if you want to play arenas, expect to get booed. And Greg put it this way: With a large audience comes a large chance that not everyone is going to like your work, and that's okay. In fact, the least interesting Super Bowl work is mostly the result of people trying to do something that everyone is going to like. The goal is to do something that enough people love. To me, standout commercials are the ones that often bring out strong opinions. And Jacques echoed Greg's sentiment, urging agencies and brands to throw out the quote-unquote rules of Super Bowl advertising.
The advice I'd give to anyone who's approaching their first Super Bowl ad is to really start with being mindful of the context the ad's going to run in and not try to do something that everyone else has done before. The last thing I'm going to do is blend in. And I think that the initial gut instinct is to compete, and therefore it makes you want to blend in. This ad needs to be what it needs to be for this brand. I'm not trying to be someone else. I'm not trying to be the next Budweiser, the next this. Like, how can I do it for this brand as well as I can, and not get distracted by all of the bigness and the noise? I think that, it reminds me of like what a professional athlete must feel like playing. It's like at some point you got to tune out the crowd and just like play the game.
I asked each of my guests to share advice for someone who's making their first Super Bowl spot. And aside from putting on blinders and staying true to your brand and vision, another key theme emerged, which was the importance of organization. And here's where I'll say, the majority of the experiences shared with me for this episode were overwhelmingly positive. And honestly, that surprised me. I went into these interviews expecting to hear war stories and tales of creative heartache and stress and chaos. And while everyone, of course, has their fair share of that stuff, it certainly wasn't their overall takeaway from the experience. But that's not to say everyone's experience is all sunshine and rainbows. Some folks on my Instagram who wanted to remain anonymous did share some negative experiences with me, and those were largely due to a lack of organization. Some were brought into the process way too late, especially media folks. Others said that there were way too many cooks in the kitchen. There were clients popping in and out, throwing wrenches into things. The talent or their team was extremely hard to work with. Organization seems to be where Super Bowl marketing can either succeed or fail. So get buttoned up and avoid the heartache. And this brings me to another crucial piece of advice for aspiring Super Bowlers. Make sure the team has someone or multiple someones who can bring a sense of calm and confidence. Because when the pressure is on and the deadlines are looming, it's those voices of reason that can help you stay focused and grounded. And Frank and Gavi told me about coming up to the 11th hour for submitting their spot. And having been very new to the process, they were obviously spiraling. But their CD was cool, calm, and collected, reassuring them that everything would be fine.
He's like, no, it will happen. It will happen. Like, don't worry. I've seen this happen before. It will happen. And we're like, are you sure? And we're like, XYZ's happening. Like, there's no way. Blah, blah, blah.
It's
Like,
the SpongeBob scene of like,
oh, all the little SpongeBobs are running around. It's like, oh no, like, and we're overclocking it. We're working at like, 2 times fastest to make this happen. And he's just calm as can be. And then I think one of our producers went out to take a phone call, and they come back in and they're like, okay, yeah, we're good. And he turns to us and he's like, you see?
I ended every interview with the same question. Do you think the Super Bowl is the pinnacle of advertising, both from a career standpoint and from the perspective of reaching the largest possible audience?
Yes, I do. I consider it the pinnacle of advertising. I think it puts you in a conversation with 100+ million people all at once.
It's definitely the pinnacle of American advertising, just to state the obvious. And because of that, I want to say that it does have ripple effects across the globe. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole world is going to be watching the Super Bowl, but I think at least across our industry, I think everybody pays attention to it on a global scale.
like I think for an advertiser or creative person making it, it is still the pinnacle because you can say you've made a Super Bowl ad and everyone will understand the work and the pressures, and it's just, you don't have to communicate the skill or whatever. Like it's just goes without saying.
Coming from a regional standpoint, I've just never felt that way. I think there's a lot of hype behind the Super Bowl and well warranted at the end of the day. But I mentioned earlier about telling a story through the character building and brand building. over time. I've always considered the pinnacle of advertising is somehow you can do that with a large brand over times, over several years, like building that kind of enduring partnership, and seeing meaningful change and changing of hearts and minds. Our creative director he's famed with the Ford is the best in Texas campaign, which is iconic here around Texas. Like, to me, those that are like stick around and you always think of, like, when you have random like brain fart moments where you think of a weird, quirky saying and you're like, I haven't thought about that forever. How's this commercial in my head forever? That's when I consider yourself at the pinnacle of advertising, not necessarily a 30-second spot in the Super Bowl.
My opinion, I recognize that the Super Bowl isn't the be-all, end-all of advertising success. There's magic to be found on any stage, even a regional one in mid-October. I've forgotten plenty of Super Bowl spots before the game was even over. But there are non-Super Bowl spots that I saw years and years ago and can still quote every word of. But there's no denying that there is no other single night that's as big as the Super Bowl. And I don't think there will be anytime soon. Sure, the advertising landscape is shifting all the time, especially with digital and influencers and who knows what'll pop up next. The Super Bowl's dominance may be challenged at some point, but for the foreseeable future, nothing else in the US brings that many eyeballs to the same place on one night. Getting to hear these firsthand accounts was energizing. Because like I said, I came into this expecting to hear that working on the Super Bowl sucks. I thought they'd say, it's not what everyone thinks it is. Don't do it. It's actually terrible. When I first started researching for this episode, I found a Reddit thread where someone asked, what's it like to make a Super Bowl spot? And the top comment was, in 30 seconds, you can realize that you wasted the last 6 months of your life. Biggest existential crisis I've ever had. But instead of negativity and existential crises, I heard stories about the pressure, the chaos, the last-minute panic, all told with a sense of perspective, even humor. It seems that for many advertising folks, the Super Bowl experience, despite its challenges, is ultimately enriching and filled with opportunity.
It's funny. I wouldn't say pressure is the word. I obviously understand the level of responsibility involved in something like this. With that level of responsibility, I try to make sure that we're getting a lot of joy out of it as well. I think it's so important. And this might sound naive, but I believe that you see it in the work and you feel it in the work. When the process has been just the grind, you can feel it. And when it's been a joy, you can also feel it.
You can feel it. Super Bowl spots are largely beautiful, funny, well shot, creative, and drivers of so much joy for millions of people, but especially for the people who made them. A huge, huge thank you to all of the amazing people who shared their Super Bowl stories with me: Jacques, Frank, Gabby, Chris, Tiago, Scott, Marissa, Jennifer, Steve, and all of those who preferred to remain anonymous. I truly appreciate your insights and your candor. And to those of you who had work in this year's game, congratulations. I'm recording this before the big game, but you'll be hearing it afterward. So I hope your Super Bowl Sunday was filled with pride and plenty of good food. And to those listening and watching, I want to hear from you too. If you're on Spotify or YouTube, you can leave me a comment or you can message me on Instagram. If you've worked on a Super Bowl campaign, I'm all ears. Tell me about your experience, the good and the bad. And if you haven't, tell me if anything in this episode either confirmed or challenged any of your assumptions about what goes on behind the scenes. That's all for now. If you have time, I would love it if you could rate and review the show. And I hope you'll join me next time for more stuff about advertising.